War on screen has always been larger than life. But when steel beasts clash on the battlefield, Hollywood often takes liberties, sometimes rewriting history in fire and smoke. Did these films honor the truth of tank warfare or bury it under spectacle? Today, we dive into 12 movies that got tank battles wrong and 8 that nailed them. Fury, 2014. Nailed it. When David Ayer's Fury rolled into theaters, audiences braced for another glossy, over-the-top World War II movie. But instead, they found one of the most visceral portrayals of tank combat ever put on screen. Anchored by Brad Pitt's stoic performance as War Daddy, the film placed viewers inside the cramped, suffocating, and terrifying interior of a Sherman tank. Historians praise the authenticity. The way the crew communicated in near-telegraphic bursts, the mechanical grinding of gears, and even the sheer claustrophobia of being sealed inside what was essentially a metal coffin. The production team went so far as to borrow real tanks from museums and private collectors, including one of the last working German Tiger I tanks in existence, a legendary machine rarely seen outside archives. The standout sequence: a brutal tank duel in the German countryside where a group of Shermans faces off against a Tiger I. For once, Hollywood didn't bend the rules. The Tiger rips through them with terrifying ease, just as it did historically. It's only through sheer grit and sacrifice that Pitt's crew prevails, showing the staggering imbalance Allied tankers often faced. Fury wasn't just a war movie, it was a tribute to the unsung, grease-covered soldiers whose battles weren't fought on open fields, but inside roaring furnaces of steel. In honoring them, the film nailed the essence of tank combat. Patton, 1970. Got it wrong. Patton may have won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, but when it came to tanks, accuracy took a back seat to spectacle. George C. Scott's unforgettable portrayal of General George S. Patton elevated the man into myth, but the tanks on screen told a very different story. The problem was the Cold War. By 1970, it was nearly impossible to source authentic World War II German Panzers or American Shermans. Instead, the filmmakers used modern M48 Patton tanks, machines from the 1950s, painted over to resemble vehicles from the 1940s. For military purists, this was like showing jet fighters in a Civil War film. The silhouette size and even the gun barrels were glaringly anachronistic. Battle sequences, too, strayed into Hollywood fantasy. Tanks charged across open plains like knights in armor, ignoring the real tactics of concealment, flanking, and ambush that defined World War II armor combat. Critics at the time may not have noticed, but veterans did, and many wrote letters pointing out the disconnect. Yet, for all its flaws, Patton remains a cinematic classic, reminding us how movies often choose legend over truth. It got the man's fiery spirit right, but when it came to the tanks themselves, history was left in the dust. Kelly's Heroes, 1970. Got it wrong. When Kelly's Heroes premiered, it promised something rare for its time. A war movie laced with comedy, rebellion, and the anti-establishment tone of the late 60s. Clint Eastwood led a ragtag crew of American soldiers on a mission behind enemy lines, not for glory, but for gold. Audiences loved the irreverence, but when it came to tanks, the film strayed far from accuracy. The German Tiger tanks shown on screen weren't Tigers at all. They were actually Soviet T-34s disguised with cosmetic changes. The hulls, turrets, and even the gun barrels gave them away to military enthusiasts. At the time, few Western viewers noticed, but veterans and armor experts immediately called out the deception. The real Tiger I was nearly extinct outside museums, so the filmmakers did what many productions of the era did: make do with whatever Cold War leftovers were available. Even the battle sequences leaned toward Hollywood spectacle rather than historical realism. Tanks are shown lumbering into narrow village streets and firing point-blank at buildings without consequence. The choreography focused more on dramatic standoffs and witty banter than on actual tank tactics, which were typically cautious, coordinated, and deadly precise. Soldiers rarely charged in so recklessly, knowing one well-placed shot could annihilate an entire crew. Still, Kelly's Heroes wasn't trying to be Fury or Saving Private Ryan. It reflected its era, a Vietnam-era satire that mocked authority, military hierarchy, and even the war itself. Its inaccuracies in tank design and tactics may frustrate historians, but its charm lies in its refusal to play straight. The movie wasn't about war as it was, but war as absurdist theater. And in that way it succeeded, even while driving history buffs up the wall. Saving Private Ryan, 1998. Nailed it. Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan redefined how we see war on film. From the shattering opening at Omaha Beach to its closing battle in a ruined French town, it aimed to place audiences inside the raw chaos of World War II. And when it came to tanks, Spielberg delivered a vision both terrifying and authentic. The climactic encounter with German armor showcased not only the physical danger of tanks, but also their psychological weight. The Tiger tank rolling into the village isn't portrayed as just another enemy machine, it's a monster creeping forward with the inevitability of death. The sound design alone, with its metallic growl and screeching treads, sent shivers down viewers' spines. Behind the scenes, the production faced a problem. There were no functional Tigers left to rent, so Spielberg's team cleverly disguised Soviet T-34s as Tiger tanks. But unlike Kelly's heroes, the details were handled with painstaking care, from turret shape to armor plating. For most viewers, and even many veterans, the illusion was seamless. More importantly, the way the tank was used reflected real tactics. German armor rarely rushed blindly. Instead, it pressed forward with measured dominance, forcing infantry into desperate measures like Molotov cocktails and sticky bombs. Spielberg consulted historians and veterans to ensure the crew's reactions were real. The fear, the scramble for anti-tank weapons, the hopeless sense of small arms fire bouncing harmlessly off armor. The scene where soldiers try to hold back the Tiger with bazookas and explosives captured the brutal truth of fighting tanks with inadequate tools. Critics hailed the authenticity, but the true praise came from veterans who said the film was the closest Hollywood had ever come to showing the true terror of facing German armor. Saving Private Ryan didn't just show tanks, it made audiences feel their weight and dread, and that's why it nailed it. Battle of the Bulge, 1965, Got It Wrong released. 2 decades after the real Battle of the Bulge, this sprawling war epic tried to capture the scale of Hitler's last great offensive in the West. It had a star-studded cast: Henry Fonda, Robert Shaw, Charles Bronson, but for all its ambition, it became infamous for its tank battle inaccuracies. The film was shot in Spain, not Belgium, which immediately stripped away the snowy forests and freezing conditions that defined the actual battle. Instead, tanks rumbled across sunlit plains that looked more like North Africa than the Ardennes. And those weren't even World War II tanks. Once again, the filmmakers used modern American M47 patents painted with German crosses, standing in for Nazi panzers. To history buffs, it was like seeing a Corvette in a Roman chariot race. Tactically, the movie fared no better. The real Battle of the Bulge was defined by ambushes, hit-and-run attacks, and desperate defensive maneuvers in snowbound forests. In the film, tanks charge across open fields in long, orderly lines, exactly the opposite of how the Germans tried to exploit terrain and weather to their advantage. At one point, a massive tank duel unfolds in a wide valley, played almost like a Western showdown. Veterans who fought in the Ardennes were quick to point out that no such battle ever occurred. Despite these glaring inaccuracies, the movie remains popular among casual audiences for its scale and drama. It's remembered less for history and more for entertainment, with Robert Shaw's ruthless German commander embodying pure cinematic villainy. But for anyone who lived through that winter in 1944, the film's sunny landscapes and futuristic tanks were a bitter reminder of how far Hollywood can stray from truth. Battle of the Bulge wasn't just wrong, it turned a desperate, freezing struggle into a colorful spectacle. Lebanon, 2009. Nailed it. In stark contrast to Hollywood spectacle, Samuel Mayaz's Lebanon offered a hauntingly intimate view of tank warfare. Set during Israel's 1982 invasion of Lebanon, the entire film unfolds from inside the cramped belly of a single tank. There are no sweeping battlefields, no grand orchestral scores, just oil, sweat, fear, and the suffocating darkness of steel walls. The film was inspired by Mayaz's own experiences as a young gunner. Every sound, the creak of metal, the hiss of hydraulics, the frantic shouts over the intercom, feels terrifyingly real. Unlike Hollywood war movies, there's no glory here. The crew is disoriented, terrified, and often unsure whether they're firing at enemies or civilians. Their supposed weapon of dominance becomes a claustrophobic prison. Critics praise the film's honesty. The camera rarely leaves the tank's interior, showing the outside world only through the gunner's scope, a narrow, distorted view that mirrors the confusion of real combat. This choice underscored how tanks, often seen as unstoppable juggernauts, could also isolate and dehumanize the very soldiers inside them. Unlike Battle of the Bulge, where tanks clash like chess pieces on a board, Lebanon shows the messy, morally gray truth. Decisions made in seconds, often with incomplete information and consequences that haunt forever. The film shocked audiences with its raw, emotional weight, earning the Golden Lion at Venice and cementing itself as one of the most authentic tank war movies ever made. Lebanon didn't try to mythologize tanks or turn them into cinematic monsters. Instead, it revealed the terrifying vulnerability of those trapped within, forced to fight a war they didn't fully understand. And in doing so, it nailed the essence of armored warfare, not as spectacle, but as suffocating human tragedy. Red Dawn, 1984. Got it wrong. When John Milius released Red Dawn at the height of the Cold War, it became the ultimate teenage resistance fantasy, a group of American high schoolers taking up arms against a Soviet invasion. It was patriotic, pulpy, and undeniably entertaining. But when it came to tanks, the film took giant leaps into the realm of implausibility. The film depicted Soviet T-72s rolling through small-town America, crushing resistance with overwhelming firepower. Except they weren't T-72s at all. Hollywood couldn't get access to authentic Soviet armor, so they modified American M48 patents to look vaguely Russian. For casual viewers in 1984, this sleight of hand worked fine. Few had ever seen a real T-72. But to anyone with even passing knowledge of armor, the disguises were laughable. Beyond appearances, the tactics shown bordered on fantasy. Soviet tanks casually lumber down main streets, exposed to ambush from rooftops and alleyways. The Wolverines, our teenage heroes, managed to take them out with reckless ease using Molotov cocktails and rocket launchers. In reality, well-trained Soviet crews would have avoided such bottlenecks, deployed infantry support, and used air cover to flush out resistance. The idea of untrained teens systematically ambushing armor would have been near impossible. The legacy of Red Dawn lies not in its accuracy, but in its cultural footprint. It was the first PG-13 movie ever released, and it tapped into genuine American anxieties of invasion and nuclear war. But it also reduced the complexity of modern mechanized warfare to comic book simplicity. Tanks were less terrifying machines of war than faceless props for teenage heroics. For audiences swept up in 1980s Cold War paranoia, the inaccuracies didn't matter. For historians and veterans, however, it was a frustrating reminder that Hollywood often prefers fantasy over the hard truths of combat. Red Dawn got the adrenaline right, but when it came to tanks, it got nearly everything wrong. Das Boot, 1981. Nailed it, with tanks by absence. At first glance, you might wonder, why include a submarine film in a list about tank battles? Wolfgang Petersen's Das Boot is one of the greatest war films ever made, yet it contains no tanks at all. But here's the twist. Its authenticity in portraying armored warfare from inside a machine deserves its place. Much like Samuel Mayaz's Lebanon, Petersen's film captured the claustrophobic terror of being entombed within steel. Submarines, like tanks, were designed as armored beasts, but the human experience inside them mirrored what many tank crews described: isolation, disorientation, and the constant fear that death could come from a single well-placed shot. Peterson worked with former U-boat officers to ensure the realism was impeccable. The sweat dripping from pipes, the groaning steel, the suffocating air thick with diesel. By showing armored combat from the perspective of the trapped crew, Das Boot redefined how audiences understood mechanized warfare. The film's unflinching realism influenced later tank films like Lebanon and even Spielberg's approach in Saving Private Ryan. Where Hollywood often glorified armored machines as symbols of power, Peterson stripped them of romance, exposing the fear and vulnerability inside. Though Das Boot isn't about tanks rolling across Europe, it nailed the essence of armor warfare in its rawest human terms. The crew wasn't fighting just the enemy. They were fighting their own suffocating machine, their nerves, and the crushing silence between attacks. Tanks may not appear on screen, but the lessons it taught about life inside armored steel resonate with every soldier who's ever closed a hatch and prayed to survive. Das Boot proved that war machines are terrifying not because of their size, but because of the fragile human souls trapped inside them. And that makes it one of the most truthful depictions of armored combat ever filmed. A Bridge Too Far, 1977. Got it wrong. Richard Attenborough's A Bridge Too Far was one of the most ambitious war epics ever filmed. With an all-star cast, Sean Connery, Gene Hackman, Anthony Hopkins, it set out to depict Operation Market Garden, the Yelwist doomed Allied attempt to seize bridges in the Netherlands in 1944. The film's scale was breathtaking, but its depiction of tank warfare fell short of the truth. The most glaring issue? The tanks themselves. Once again, Cold War vehicles like the British Chieftain and American Shermans stood in for German Tigers. While less jarring than the M47s in Battle of the Bulge, it still broke immersion for anyone familiar with World War II hardware. Even worse, the battle choreography often exaggerated tank duels, portraying Shermans going toe-to-toe with German armor in set-piece showdowns. In reality, Allied tankers avoided head-on fights with superior German guns whenever possible. Another problem was the neatness of it all. The real Operation Market Garden was chaotic. Bridges destroyed, tanks bogged down in marshes, communication failures at every level. But on screen, armored battles unfold like chess matches, each move carefully staged for cinematic clarity. While the acting and production design captured the grandeur of the failed operation, the raw confusion of armored warfare was sanded down. Still, A Bridge Too Far deserves credit for ambition. It introduced audiences to a lesser-known World War II campaign and dared to show failure rather than triumph. But when it came to tanks, history lost out to spectacle. The result was a film that looked impressive but rang false to those who had lived the battle. The Beast of War, 1988. Nailed it if Red Dawn turned Soviet tanks into faceless villains, The Beast of War did the opposite. It humanized the men trapped inside them. Directed by Kevin Reynolds, the film follows a Soviet T-55 crew during the invasion of Afghanistan. It flopped at the box office, but critics and veterans later hailed it as one of the most authentic depictions of tank combat ever filmed. Unlike Hollywood blockbusters, the film didn't shy away from the horrors of armored warfare. The tank becomes both weapon and prison, lumbering through hostile terrain as Afghan rebels stalk it from the hills. The crew suffers not just from enemy fire, but from heat, exhaustion, and paranoia. The tank commander rules with cruelty, while the conscripts beneath him wrestle with fear and moral doubt. What made The Beast stand out was its unflinching look at the Soviet perspective, something almost unheard of in American cinema at the time. The film captured the tactical limitations of tanks in mountainous terrain, lumbering giants vulnerable to hit-and-run ambushes. The oppressive heat inside the steel hull was depicted so vividly that viewers swore they could feel it. Though largely ignored upon release, the film became a cult classic among military enthusiasts who praised its authenticity and moral complexity. It showed tanks not as invincible machines, but as vulnerable beasts that trapped their crews as much as they threatened their enemies. For once, Hollywood nailed it. Ironclads, 1991. Got it wrong. A made-for-TV movie about the American Civil War might seem like an odd entry here, but Ironclads earns its place for how it mishandled one of history's earliest armored clashes. The famous duel between the USS Monitor and the CSS Virginia. While not tanks in the modern sense, these ironclad war machines were the tanks of their day, armored monsters that changed naval warfare forever. Unfortunately, ironclads reduced the battle to a clunky reenactment. The sets looked cheap, the scale felt small, and the tactics were simplified into ships circling one another like jousting knights. In reality, the duel was a brutal slugfest fought at point-blank range, with crews enduring suffocating smoke, deafening cannon fire, and searing heat inside their armored hulls. The film also struggled with accuracy and design. The Monitor's revolutionary rotating turret and the Virginia's sloped casemate armor were real engineering marvels, but the sets made them look like oversized bath toys. Worse, the historical significance of the battle, the dawn of a new era in armored warfare, was buried under melodrama and stiff acting. Though an earnest attempt, Ironclads failed to capture the terror and awe of the first time men realized wooden ships were obsolete. It got the spirit of innovation right, but its execution left audiences with little sense of why the battle mattered. Come and See, 1985. Nailed it. Elem Klimov's Come and See is often hailed as the greatest anti-war film ever made. A Soviet masterpiece set during the Nazi invasion of Belarus, it doesn't center on tanks, but when they appear, their presence is unforgettable. Unlike Hollywood, which often turns tanks into props for action, Klimov used them to show the sheer terror of mechanized destruction. The film follows a young boy, Floria, as he's dragged into the nightmare of occupation. When German tanks roll through villages, they're not depicted as glorious machines of battle. They're depicted as instruments of annihilation. The sound alone, the grinding tracks, the roar of engines, fills the screen with dread. Unlike Red Dawn or Battle of the Bulge, there's no sense of fantasy here. The tanks in Come and See don't duel heroically. They crush, burn, and slaughter. Civilians scatter before them, and their overwhelming presence reinforces the film's central theme. That war is not adventure, but apocalypse. Klimov's meticulous attention to detail extended even to the way tanks interacted with their environment. Their weight deforms the earth, their shells obliterate walls, their smoke chokes the sky. For once, cinema didn't romanticize armored power. It revealed its monstrous truth. Historians and critics alike praised the film's authenticity, but more importantly, audiences who endured war said it came closest to capturing their memories of occupation. Come and See nailed it not by glorifying tanks, but by exposing them as the inhuman destroyers they truly were. From glossy epics that turned tanks into props, to haunting masterpieces that showed their suffocating truth, cinema has wrestled with how to portray armored war. Some got it laughably wrong, others devastatingly right. Which films do you think nailed it or failed it? Comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.